Lend your ears, lend your hands, lend your movement, anything you can. Come to teach, come to be taught, come in the likeness and the image of God. 'Cause you can be like that, with all that humbleness and all that respect.
And greetings and salutations, everyone. You've turned into Global Recovery Today. Here it's Wednesday at 7:30 here at Universal Broadcasting Radio Network, ubnradio.com. I'm your host, Walt Lusk, with, of course, Tyson Elliott on an undisclosed location once again with a special guest. And Global Recovery Today is actually a group of like-minded people dedicated to finding real solutions for addiction and the root causes. And they've got a fabulous clinic down in Mexico, and we're going to talk about that and some other things. So why don't you take it away, Tyson?
Yes, thank you, Walt. I want to welcome John Sage. Thanks, John, for being on the show today.
Who's got the wind?
What's that?
Has
wind in the background?
Yes.
Well, I will, John, unless you and I both agree, if we're not going to be talking, there's a mute in the lower corner there. You can use that so that you're not... I don't hear anything in my background, so I doubt it's me.
Okay.
But so anyway, I want to welcome everybody to the show that's watching it live, and to anybody who takes the time to watch it afterwards. We're going to talk about a few things. The first thing is I want to announce that we've been accepted to iHeart Radio.
It's official. We are on iHeart Radio, so you can go to iHeart Radio app, which is actually a huge kudos to the show. And you go to iHeartRadio on the app on your smartphone, or of course you can go online and go to iHeartRadio, and all the former shows I checked are there. And you can also find us on Stitcher, Spreaker, iTunes, and of course here at UBN Radio, and of course we have this all on YouTube as well. So there's a plethora of options for you guys to check the show out.
And to promote to friends and family. If you know somebody who's struggling with addiction and wants to hear, the story of some people who have had an experience with any of the number of treatments we're suggesting here, then also want to reach out and get information, and talk to me or other people that have been on the show. I can connect people. So there's a number, Walt, for dial-in as well.
There sure is. A call-in number, if you want to be on the show, is area code 323-524-2599. That's 323-524-2599. And we'll put you right on air with Tyson and John and me.
Awesome. I want to point out my T-shirt, if you can't see, read it, says the Lovejoy Foundation. The Lovejoy Foundation is one of the many nonprofits that will be collaborating to, in this case, the Lovejoy Foundation is an animal rescue, working with dogs specifically. Over the past 5 years now, I've been volunteering there, and I went there after one of my long periods. I've had periods of sobriety ranging from, days, months to 3 years. And I had gone through a 6-year period of struggling with stopping drinking. And, I came back and, there's nothing else available to me but Alcoholics Anonymous and 12 steps. So I put myself in the sober living house and started going to meetings. And I had, been, if you listen to the message in these programs, many of them say, service work is, a great way. And I've always loved animals, and I found the Lovejoy Foundation off PCH and just walked in there one day and said, I'd like to help out. And I started just walking dogs, cleaning up dog poop, and found out about foster care and was offered an opportunity to actually care for one of the rescues until it was placed, which is, at the time, I didn't really understand how therapeutic it could be for me and the benefits of it. But what ended up happening is I ended up becoming, the caretaker of, several young dogs between the period of time they were picked up off the streets or surrendered by the family, and take them up on the weekends for adoption until they would be placed. And what ended up happening is I ended up, very much finding myself caring for that animal in a way that I hadn't really cared for myself in a very long time, with a rigid schedule of diet and exercise and attention. And became clear to me that this was very helpful in my own recovery. I was able to stay sober, and eventually was invited down to Mexico to start working with Ibogaine. The whole time really starting to formulate this idea that there was a lot of healing in working with animals, dogs specifically. And I saw some of the documentaries on how dogs were being used at prisons to help rehabilitate people. And I formulated a hypothesis that I was able to practice when I decided to open up All Soul Sanctuary and the Recovery Dogs a little over 2 years ago. I started pulling dogs right off the streets of Tijuana. I had patients coming that had done Ibogaine to my clinic, and they would help me work with the dogs. They would care for them while they were caring for themselves. And what came up to me was that there is some real magic. And to quickly outline what I was feeling is that, again, the behavioral modification that needs to happen from someone who has been separated from society because of their addiction. So that's one of the issues with how we treat those that have struggled with addiction. And I avoid using the word as addicts, as if that defines somebody. Yes, it's a term for a condition that somebody may or may not be in the grips of, addiction, but it is not who they are. So I do occasionally do it, and I apologize. It's not my intention to do that. It's part of just the way it's been done. But I am trying to change it to those that have struggled with addiction. And so those that have struggled with addiction and have been labeled as addicts then are institutionalized. Family members often, separate themselves. You're not welcome at the home while you're in your addiction. And they ask for them to seek help going into any number of professional programs, rehabs that fail pretty miserably. Our success rate is really, really low. And I have my opinions on that, and we'll invite people on to share their experience. Maybe John will share his experience. But the dogs and working with the dogs give them an immediate opportunity to be working with an animal that gives them unconditional love, real unconditional love that parents are culturally we are not taught how to love unconditionally. What we're taught is a very sort of domestic, the way we train our dogs through punishment and reward is the way we raise our children. And we teach them at a young age that if you want to make me happy, you do this. And so what ends up happening, that young child that just does whatever they want is being trained to do things what the parents want in order to achieve some reward or to avoid some punishment. So when they all of a sudden, that one they trust the most, the parents teach them that love is conditional through no fault of their own. That's the way that we were raised. There's a disconnect. And the dogs don't have that. No matter what you do to a dog, they're going to love you unconditionally. And I don't know what the solution is, if there's a shift in parenting that can happen. But I do know in working with people that have been traumatized or been isolated because of their addiction, to get that unconditional love, to be able to take on this life and to start working with it, they will find themselves inclined to take care of themselves in a way that they weren't doing for however long that they've been, struggling with this disease, if you believe the disease model. We could talk about that, but I wanted to just sort of outline why I started working with dogs. The other element of that is them working in society to be accepted back into society. They take the dogs up for adoption, and they give up that dog for adoption. And in doing so, they're actually going through one of the hardest things we do in recovery, which is to love and to lose and to not use. So if they can do that in a therapeutic environment surrounded by people in recovery that can help them transcend this experience without using, we've hit a milestone in recovery that gives them a much greater chance of reintegrating in society and not having to go back to, utilizing substances that, very well could threaten their life. And then the third part of that is that the fact that the community, the mothers and daughters and the children, that they're actively engaging in an adoption setting are saying they're paying for the dog and they're taking it back in. It's a very ritualistic acceptance back into society, which is really important for those of us that have struggled with addiction to feel our place and take our place back in society. So to feel the unconditional love, to love and to lose and not use, and to be part of a ritual, which is the giving of the dog where the society accepts us back in, are some of the things that I believe are unique to the idea of using dog rescue and working with dogs as part of a recovery program. So on that note, I want to welcome John to the show. Hi, John.
How are you?
Good, great. I'm really grateful for you showing up for us.
Welcome aboard.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
And so you want to give us maybe a little bit of a bio of who you are, where you're from, and
I'll tell you why I'm here and
Yes.
what brought me to this point. I'm a 64-year-old father of 4 boys, and they range in ages from 37 down to 24. About 16 years ago, I found my 15-year-old smoking marijuana upstairs in our bathroom. I guess you have to really understand a little bit about me and my background. I am a very active LDS member, and I've served a mission in Argentina. I've served as a bishop. I'm very active. And for us, this thing called the Word of Wisdom says, well, you don't get involved in things like that. I've never smoked. I've never drank a drop of alcohol. I've never done any of that kind of stuff. And so when this started to happen in my life, and this young man at the age of 15 kind of got involved, and from there moved out and had some of those experiences that you were talking about, some losses in his life, some things of that nature. And I consider myself to be one of those typical fathers who just did not know, did not understand, and really was blind to what was really, truly going on. And as this thing developed, we probably approached it in the traditional way. And traditional way for a guy like me, a father or a mother or a family, is sometimes to go to the young person and say, well, just stop that. Just stop that baloney off. You just got to stop that. And that just didn't work because, again, it was probably a little bit of that reward situation you were talking about. I was hoping that he would do this. I was hoping that he would do that, when in reality he had his own life to live. And there were issues that were driving this whole thing. So it progressed to a point where several years ago, he got involved in harder drugs and started using coke with everything that you could imagine. But he ended up using heroin. And he told me a rather interesting story recently as we really opened up and through this whole experience kind of come to know one another after all this time. He told me, when I was smoking heroin, that was one thing. But Dad, the day that I shot heroin into my veins, a whole new world opened up to me. Everything changed for me. And at that point in time, I was hooked. I was on my way. And this was, probably 3-4 years ago. So we dealt as a family with a young man who was doing face plants at the dinner table and was using a number of different things, including heroin, and in and out of trouble, wrecking cars. I mean, any number of things that you've read about or heard about in regards to an addict, we've dealt with that. And I never thought for a moment in my life that I would. I just didn't think that would happen in my home. But here I was living with a full-blown addict who was shooting heroin, who was living for it. And it got really, really bad a couple of years ago, to the point where, we had to do something. And he was reticent to get involved in any kind of rehab or try to get himself straightened out, till he hit a point at rock bottom where, having wrecked the car, having driven off the road, almost killed somebody, had a sheriff follow him home, arrest him, throw him in jail, any number of different things. That happened 3 or 4 different times. He realized he needed some help. So I did what traditionally a dad would do, because I just knew no better. I didn't know what was going on with this young man. We put him in a rehab, and it was one of those intervention kinds of situations, which was essentially along with his friends and our family. You either go or you're on the street. You're out. We're not going to associate with you. The things that you hear that you should do with an addict, the tough love thing and all that kind of stuff. So he entered into a rehab, and he did really well there because he's one of those loving, kind of sweet guys who has capacity to really involve people in his life. He's just an incredible kid. He's of all my boys. I can still expect a great big sloppy kiss from him anytime I see him because he's just that kind of guy, and he loves people. And so he did really well in the environment, and he was cleaning himself up. But underlying the whole thing, as I learned after we got through all this, was the addiction. There was really nothing being done for the addiction. He was being helped and going to meetings and 12-step and all these different things, which are great. But there was really nothing ever done for the addiction. And so he got out of there. He actually got bounced out of there after he got in a fight with the guy that was running the house because he thought he was being mistreated. So he got bounced out and immediately went back to using drugs, and got so bad to a point where I said, look, we've got to get you into a rehab. I called Salvation Army, which is a noted rehab here, a free one for somebody like him who has no resources, and was trying to get him ready for that. And he said, I can't go, Dad. I can't go because I can't test. I won't test clean. I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, I've used in the last couple of days. And I said, well, we got to get you clean. So I took him to a hospital situation and got him detoxed to the tune of about $4,500 in a matter of 6 days, and thought that would help. When in reality, all it did was clean him up so that 2 days later, he could overdose and almost kill himself in a hotel room in West Hollywood. And thank heaven he had a couple of friends there that got him to a hospital. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with what happens with addicts in hospitals, but as soon as they clean you up, they kick you out. They don't have time for you. They don't have resources for you. They don't care about you, quite frankly. So he was out. And at that point in time, we knew that this kid was either going to kill himself or we had to find something. So one of my boys, my second son, who lives in the San Diego area, is a bright businessman, really doing a great job. Sweet family, young kids, only one of my boys that's married. He said, Dad, we have to do something to help this guy. He's going to kill himself. He's going to be gone. He won't be one of the brothers, which they called themselves, as they call themselves now. He said, Dad, I've been doing some research, and I've learned of this substance that is amazing. I've read incredible stories about it. You need to learn. You need to go and find out. And so that's how we hooked up. That's how we came down into Mexico and hooked up with Tyson, learned about ibogaine. I was ignorant of any of it. I had no idea what ibogaine was, ayahuasca, toads, mushrooms, any of the psychedelics. To me, that was all bad stuff because I was born a Mormon, and Mormons don't do that kind of thing. And to me, that was all not right. But then I learned and understood, as I learned from his experience and learned from Tyson and others, what really goes on, what really happens, what a psychedelic can do. And I am of the opinion that these substances are here to be of benefit. I think man misuses a lot of the good substances that are here on earth. I don't think tobacco is used properly. I don't think marijuana is used properly. It has incredible properties, but I don't think it should be smoked. It's just going to damage the lungs. But I learned, we got him involved. He got down there. He had the experience that Tyson can tell you about better than me. And he grew. He has been doing exceedingly well. And he, from that point forward, had no desire to do anything. I talk to him daily. He's still down in the Oceanside area. He's been involved in therapy for a month and a half, 2 months. He's still involved. He's now moved into a sober living place with some guys. He's got a job. He's using the skills that he's learned to help, but he had the start that he needed with the ibogaine treatment. It helped him get to where he could, from that point, learn and move forward. Is it over? No, it's not. Unfortunately, addiction is a lifetime effort against that. You have to be very, very wary and keep working towards it. It just doesn't go away with an ibogaine treatment. That's not the way it works. But for him, it has been an incredible blessing.
John, man, I'm so glad that you were able to have experience. And as I share, and I want to make sure setting proper expectations, putting on that old, salesman hat. I was, I sold algorithmic trading systems and commodities, and I sold greed. I have this sort of social moral barometer where I want to be doing good. And for so many years, I got caught up in just surviving and making money. And I really looked at my sales ability and kind of shamed it in myself, and it drove my drinking and using. And it wasn't until I got involved in working with families and ibogaine that I realized that it was my training ground, and that this was my skill set, was to help families overcome the fear that they need to get the help that they need. And in this case, Derek had contacted me and had a little bit of apprehension, but was more about like looking at what the best program is. And all programs are not the same. Most really look at ibogaine as a medical process where we detox them and then we send them back to the culture to which the addiction is a function. And it's not, the family, clearly he had a good upbringing. He had all of his morals were there for him, and he had a loving family. But what was underlying that thing you said, that addiction that was untreated, needs to be, that needs to be uncovered. How we see the world, emotional maturity. If I get triggered in a way emotionally and I feel this angst, anger, resentment, and I use a substance and I mask it, well, I never take that emotional invitation to evolve. So emotion is like, oh, there's some judgment. It's making me feel, something, sadness or resentment. What's the belief behind it? Let me address that so I don't continue feeling that way, and use it as opportunity to evolve and mature. So, but when we take a substance, and again, marijuana would be an example, whether you smoke it or you eat it, if you're using it as a coping mechanism to numb the feeling, then we don't change the behavior to avoid feeling that way. We just take the substance to avoid feeling that way. So we stop evolving, at that point where we start using the substances, regardless of what it is. So it isn't so much the substance, it's how we're using it to cope with life that stagnates our emotional growth. And so by coming down to the clinic, we were able to deal with the physiology of addiction, which is that he had been damaging his nervous system, where his opioid receptor sites became dependent. And if he didn't have it, he was going to get sick. But also behaviorally, he had learned to use the substance as a form of avoidance, And so the fact that I had been able to communicate that to Derek, and he had communicated that to the family, and you guys agreed that a more extensive program where he could actually work with other substances, the ayahuasca, and to then move on to additional treatment, which I don't think at the time we were able to, we don't push hard on that. We simply plant the seed that once he's through, he's going to want to do more. And you guys were able to see it through and get him into a good program. West Coast Recoveries in San Diego. Ian runs that program, an amazing program. If you've got insurance, they take insurance. They've got sober living. They've got inpatient, outpatient. You've had a good experience with them now?
Yeah, absolutely. The skill set that he came out of there with after being there for quite some time. In fact, he's still there. I think he's just now transitioning to a sober living thing with two of the other guys from West Coast. So he learned and was involved on a regular basis and, pretty intensely to begin with, all day for, 5-6 days a week kind of thing. That really helped him to learn. And I call him and talk with him on a regular basis. And I say, fall back on those skills. I recognize you telling me, hey, I'm working in a restaurant and I'm, serving food and drinks and liquor and stuff. It's not an issue for me at all. Alcohol was an issue for him before. But he said afterwards, when everything's closed down and everybody wants to go drinking, it's tough. And I said, yeah, I understand that. It is tough. And it will always be tough. But with what you've learned and what you know and how you feel, you can utilize your strength, your abilities to overcome those things. And he has. And so far, so good. And we just expect that he's going to continue to do that.
Have you, yeah, have you had, so give maybe an idea of, like, you mentioned this has shifted some of your beliefs, and so to help, mothers, fathers, children, some of the fears that you may have learned are not either not true, or some ways that you would communicate how you see differently.
It isn't a matter of me shifting any of my beliefs. It's expanding my understanding of knowledge. I think, bottom line is light is knowledge. And I believe in a Father in heaven who wants us to know and understand things. He doesn't create things on this earth by happenstance. They're here for a reason, and they're here for a use. And what I've learned essentially through all this is that a product or a substance like ibogaine that does create a psychedelic kind of an effect in an individual. That experience that can last for whatever period of time, depending on how it's being conducted, and the ayahuasca and all of those things, none of them are addictive. They're all essentially there and creating this opportunity for a person. And according to what I heard, and I had to listen to Josh because I knew nothing of it, had never experienced it, probably never will. I had to ask him, what happened to you when this happened? How is it that you were able to change? He said, Dad, I saw my life go in front of me. I saw things. I went back. I revisited in my mind through this whole thing. I was able to address certain issues. I came out of it having no desire whatsoever. But, you spoke about the receptors. My wife is a health teacher in high school, and talked to me at nauseum in regards to what happens with an addict and why they can never ever overcome addiction in a traditional form, because those receptors have been so damaged that unless they're reset, and this is the kind of information that I'm taking to some of these folks around me. I've got another LDS family who's got a kid who's dealing with severe depression. And I talked with them about this experience and said, sometimes I think our Father in heaven wants us to get a reset if we need it. And he's provided an opportunity and a way to make that happen. And it isn't bad. It's good. Because my wife will tell you, statistically, 92% of anybody who is dealing with addiction can go through rehab after rehab after rehab, but 92% of them will always fall into recidivism. 92%. So what is that telling you? Something's wrong. And so if I find something that gives me a chance at maybe potentially 30 or 40% with something like ibogaine, to me as a father, I'm going to do something about that. Because I love my kids, I love my sons enough to give them the opportunity to at least have a chance to get things straightened out. And he did. And it worked. And it's worked for numerous other individuals that I've seen the YouTube videos, and I've researched it up and down, and there's just an awful lot that can come through the proper use of something that I think we've been blessed with here on this earth that's here for our use.
And, that is the place where there's lots of things that we could go down to investigate and have a conversation about. But the idea, that taking psychedelics, we're kind of breaking the rules, or even the idea that, they need to suffer in their withdrawals in order to have a foundation for recovery. And I do believe that not using on any given day it's a real simple value proposition of like the pleasure principle as outlined by like Maslow, hierarchy of needs. Or if you say, I basically look at, what I want to do, and I look at everything and I make that decision, and it's kind of outlined for me in that. And I do believe, that any given moment, you got to have more reasons not to use than to use, because, in the past we used it for a reason. And so we got to the point where we were no longer in control of that reasoning, that we needed to use it because of the physical addiction, because there's a thing that happens, and this happens, by the way, to everybody, and it's called amygdala hijacking. And that's when we get triggered in a survival mode, fight, flight, or flees. The amygdala is the reptilian brain. It gets activated. And when we feel anxiety through stress and get triggered, that anxiety is saying our brain is starting to take over and getting that frantic, like, oh my God, you've got to do something. Right. And for normal people, there's going to be fight, flight, or freeze. And, and whenever any number of coping mechanisms. And when we've used substances to cope, we've now trained our brain to use that substance or that behavior as a coping mechanism. And that's a deep relationship. And it's represented in a neurological pathway. And psychedelics in general basically go in, and not only do they reset the receptor sites by returning neuroplasticity, but they also create new neurological pathways, which can offer additional options when in a triggered state, or what we would call amygdala hijacking. It isn't just the using, there's other options available. Now, this is true for people in any given condition, regardless of whether they're struggling with addiction. Depression is kind of the same thing, where they get caught into a flow state where the brain is saying, oh, I'm ruminating and I'm thinking about all the negative things and I can't break that mental cycle. And when we take psychedelics, whether they be natural or synthetics, like MDMA is a big psychedelic being used for trauma, right? So experiences have created trauma where our nervous system gets triggered and we see only a short number of options in our behavior, and trying to break that mental obsession is really difficult. So the idea is that we need to do it through therapy or through behavioral modification. And what I found is by using the substance as a teacher, one, where it actually shows us our life experiences, and as seeing that this is, the path that we're going to go on, the options also through the creation of new neurological pathways are presented. Now, where do the new options come from? Well, they come from being in and around higher vibration people that are offering new solutions, talking about your problems, going to meetings, not going out for drinks afterwards, being in and around recovery, where we're watching other people choose different ways of coping. And, so your son was able to, by going into recovery program and staying with it, transcend past the 30 days into the 60, 90 days and create new habits, which is what you've seen, right? So he's got new coping mechanisms.
Exactly. And, he recognizes, as do we, that this is going to be exactly what you just indicated, a lifelong opportunity for him to surround himself with good situations, good people, supportive individuals, somebody who are the people that are going to tell him, yeah, no, you're not an addict. You're a good young man. You're trying really hard. You've overcome some incredible things, and you can continue on and be all that you want to be. It doesn't matter that you're 31 years old and you've burned the last 15, 16 years of your life. That doesn't matter. Because in the scheme of things, an individual like him has the capacity to touch the lives in a much deeper way than some of us. I mean, for as old as I am and as much as I've seen, I think he has a greater capacity to bring truth and light into some people's lives than I do, because he's experienced it at a level I haven't.
Absolutely, John. And as I say, it's not how you start that matters, it's how you finish.
Exactly.
Right? So, I mean, he's got his whole life in front of him.
Well, and also, it's also an education, going through the addiction and having those experiences are something that who in the right mind would sign up for that. And while people can go get a degree to understand therapy and ethics and all those things that I think are really critical for someone as a professional to be a therapist, I'm working on putting some of those things, because I think individually our family members, our peers are our greatest opportunity to transcend, because many of us don't have money to go into therapy. And so if we're surrounding ourselves with people, having a basic education on how to offer perspective, somebody shares their experience and you want to say, hey, can I offer some perspective, and then share with what you see. And in us working together and reflecting, and my definition of a friend is someone who will lovingly share the truth with you, not necessarily just tell you what you want to hear. And if we are in a group of people where we trust those people, we're going through it together, which is one of the reasons why I think traditional rehabs don't really work. And it's that we go into therapeutic models where we are in and around people that are going through their own recovery, and that's great, but they're also not necessarily trained to help you. And more importantly, many of the people that are playing the role of therapists aren't in a program of recovery of their own and may or may not have the experiences to be able to share, and often, aren't really passing on what they think they are. It's more of like, I'm over here and I'm trying to give you information, but I'm not together having this experience that we both are collectively trying to transcend. And I know because I've been in so many rehabs, and I've been in and out of AA, which, has the 12 steps are great, but also the community and some of it really does carry a very judgmental tone.
Yeah.
Did your son have any, experiences with programs, and what were some of his criticisms of it, and why he didn't feel like he was getting what he needed or what you saw?
Josh is one of those kind of guys that assimilated well in any situation. I went to meetings with him, 12-step meetings and
really?
rehabs and whatnot, and listened to him talk. And, Josh had the tendency to, as somebody who's dealing with addiction, had a tendency to say the right things and be in the right places and do the right things all along, knowing that they're still dealing with the underlying addiction. And so he was really good at that. And it sounded like it was working. It sounded like it was great, but underlying it really wasn't, because he hadn't had that opportunity to really get to a point where he was essentially reset, quote unquote, and really come to it. I mean, and you and I've talked about this. The greatest challenge that you have, that anyone has in regards to this, is ignorance and education. The fact that I am where I am now. A year ago, I was that guy who said, "No, you got to be out of your mind. You're crazy. That's wacko. That's that's hippie weird stuff down in South America, for crying out loud. No, that's just not going to work." I was that guy, and unfortunately, the lack of understanding. I've been in the organic industry for 40 years, and it's gone basically the same way. And initially, organics were something that just were not understood. And then it started to grow, and people started to learn and understand about it. But it's taken a long time to get people to the point where they realize organic eating is better for me. It's where I should be. And in the same way, the substances that can really impact an individual's life have to be learned about, have to be understood at the level that I understood them in order for them to become effective. Because right now it's illegal in the United States. And unfortunately, you've got ignorant people like me who probably will keep it that way. And you've got Big Pharma and everybody else who's going to work diligently at trying to keep something that works like this out of the hands of people who could be cured. That's just unfortunately the truth. And so it's going to take a lot for folks like you to get to a point where they're making an impact in many, many more lives. Right now it's tens, it's hundreds. And in reality, the opioid issues that we've got in this country are far outreaching anything that is happening on the rehabilitative side. It's not working. It's just not working. And something like this could potentially. I recognize the constraints of availability and all the rest of the things that exist. But the bottom line is there has got to be a better way for people like me to help sweet young men and young women who we love.
Oh, my brother. And, Bill W. from AA started AA. He would say, he says, look, what's critical in his recovery was a spiritual experience. Until he had that spiritual experience, that God consciousness, Christ consciousness, any way you want to see it. I know with your faith, you kind of somehow in your way have that relationship with your higher power, and every part of the 12 steps is there to facilitate getting enough of the work done of cleaning up the wreckage of our past so that we can have this spiritual experience. And Bill Wilson found LSD and used it to help facilitate a spiritual experience.
Yes, he did.
And was offering it to the people that he was sponsoring, and actually did a study that is one of the most successful studies dealing with alcoholism using LSD to help facilitate the spiritual experience. And you won't hear that in AA meetings. You will however, find it in a book called Distilled Spirits. It will share with you some letters written between him and I believe Ram Dass, and it talks about why LSD can help, and psilocybin. These substances are great to basically remove this egoic veil that we lie to ourselves and we buy into it, and it's the way we see the world. And when you take these psychedelics, you kind of peer through the veil, and we actually, oh my God, I'm the one creating the situation. I can't really blame anybody else. Now, it does not in and of itself assure recovery from addiction, because now what? Okay, so I've seen the truth, but I'm going back to a culture where I'm trying to respond to a world that would really be happy with me staying addicted, because I can either end up in jail, I can end up in rehabs. All of these drive financial institutions. So, insurance companies, they won't pay for this kind of treatment. So you're forced to go to these other treatments, Yeah, and you found that out, right? I mean, your limitations there.
Oh, absolutely. It's, unfortunately, as a people and as a government and as a country, we want to find solutions and answers to all these problems that we're having. And every time I turn on the news, I hear about the increasing opioid use and the overdose deaths and things of that nature. I mean, they're escalating at an incredible rate.
Yes, they are.
Blowing up around us to where tens, and I mean, even in my own little town of Santa Clarita, 10 overdose deaths a month in this little town. Because there's an awful lot of really bad drugs out there and stuff my wife could tell you all about that I'm really not that familiar with. But we all want to find an answer. But what's happening is we're falling short of what the real answer is, and excluding the opportunity for an answer coupled with what we would call traditional kinds of rehabilitation, the love, the support, all those different things. But there has to be a way for a person to start fresh. It's almost impossible. I mean, I guess somebody said, well, the ibogaine experience is like a 6-month therapy session that happens to you in 6 hours.
10 years, right? But whatever. Everybody's got a number.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
10 years of therapy in 6 hours that gets you to a point where you can go from point A to point B. But if you can never get to point A, you're never going to get to point B.
That's a fact.
That's the problem with the system right now. We're not getting to point A.
You can be institutionalized in rehab, but even that creates separation and shame and guilt, which, kind of drives this underlying, craving to use to feel better. And so I have found that environment is critical. Getting somebody in a loving, nurturing, accepting environment where they're not judged. The withdrawals that they experience, because I've had to deal with people that health-wise can't take flood doses. And so we've got to come up with some other solutions. But calming the nervous system, getting them feel safe, can greatly minimize even the withdrawals that they experience and increase the chance of success in letting go. But ibogaine is really classified the way I would like to have it sort of discussed as an addiction interrupter, not a cure for an addiction. So it can help break that grasp of the mental obsession. It can break with the physical addiction as a teacher seeing, because we don't treat drugs or plant medicines as a teacher. You take it to address a symptom. But what happens, these plants have a level of consciousness that I can't explain with words. I've done enough of them to have the experience. But what they do is they don't communicate with words. They use images and emotions and feelings. And when we ingest them, we see this pattern of God that is operating, and it takes away the fear-based lies of the world being a certain way that's not correct, and drives us into these behaviors that don't serve us. And so we see the truth through the plant's message. And we're actually take that way of seeing it, and because we're under the influence of this plant, we're looking at our whole lives in a completely different way. I'm like, oh my God, that's not true. That's not true. And really none of it's true, because we were seeing it through the eyes of an immature young man or woman who developed a belief structure and adopted those and put them in and placed them in our memory as truth. And so we're placing our experiences against and through our process of storing memories and coming up with beliefs, we're taking experiences, we're placing them through this incorrect or this wounded, way of seeing the world. and developing beliefs and sort of mental processes that are dysfunctional. And when we take the medicine, when we take the plants in and we see this other way, we come out of it with this whole new perspective. Now we have habits and ways of being that most of what we do unconsciously, right? Like very little is actually thought out. It's happening in a reaction that's done, almost ritualistically. We wake up in the morning, we're thinking about our day. We're thinking about actually fears or things that we want to happen. And we go into mode of making coffee, going to the bathroom, walk the dog, use the bathroom, maybe reach open and do a line of oxy, and then go about our day. So in the morning, of 14 things that we do ritualistically, one of them is used. When we go back to our lives, we're only really taking that one thing away. And so I try to train people to, when they come home, they really need to break that ritual up, getting up in the morning, listening to some kind of spiritual tape that has their mind focus on something bigger than themselves, breaking up the routine, because ultimately their brain fires. And of the 14 things that they do habitually, they only took one thing out, which was the using. And that actually still is there as an option. And it will fire, and they don't realize that it's firing periodically until they actually catch it. When they're under a lot of stress, it happens and they catch it. And what will happen is they will entertain it or romance the feeling caused by the drug. So they're under stress. The idea pops up in their morning routine. And after a period of sobriety, they'll feel in their body. And I've had this experience. Oh, wouldn't it be nice to that feeling of the drink or the using? And that would take care of all the problems. And I trained myself, no, I've got to play the tape through. Okay, what would happen? I would go and I'd call the dealer and I would throw away all my time. And pretty quickly, I'd feel shameful and guilty, and I would justify using, and I would do it again and I know, because this happened again and again and again. I've had my relapses, and I know that it's never different, and I can't afford to use at all, and I can't go back to drinking. So I've got to come up with some other thing. I pick up the phone and I call, my accountability or a sponsor or a good personal friend, and I'm not a secret. I don't pretend like that didn't just happen. I tell somebody, hey, man, I had the idea of using, and for the first time I kind of romance it, and I just want to let you know that this came up. And I will take contrary action. That day, I'll do more to not use than I would have done in a normal day. Like we talked about, John, earlier, is that people use because there's more reason to use than to not use. Or for the very simple thing, I like the effect that's produced by that one drink. Or like when your son did IV heroin for the first time, he realized that game had changed. Wow, what an amazing feeling. Everything's gone. For that brief moment, I don't feel all of the shame and the guilt of being an addict. I don't feel all the pressure of not living up to my parents, wanting me to be something with my life. And so for that moment, everything's okay. And until the drugs fade off, and now, I'm back in my shame and guilt, and it's just a matter of time before my body tells me I need to use to be okay.
Yeah. I want to say something to anybody who's listening who might have doubts or concerns or questions about any of the things we've been talking about. From my perspective as a father and as a man who is faith-based, I truly believe that we've been sent here by a loving Father in heaven to meet the measure of our creation. And addiction is not part of the program. It's not part of the plan. And so what he would do for us is offer us opportunities in situations like this. He's created all these things. They're here for a reason. And what my experience with it at this point in time is that it has been a blessing to me, and a blessing to my son, and a blessing to our family. So for anybody who's listening or who might be considering these things, I would take the time to get down on your knees and ask your Father in heaven if this is the right thing to do. I found out it was. It was the only thing that was there for me to do. And he provided this opportunity. Otherwise, we would never know about ibogaine or ayahuasca or any of these other things that are there that have helped him get to where he is. And for me, again, it is to help these young men and young women meet the measure of their creation. And 16 years, 20 years, 40 years of addiction is not part of the program. It's not supposed to be that way. That's not what he sent us here on this earth to do. So find a way, learn, understand, and especially take the time to find out about some of these things like ibogaine. It can really be a benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
Awesome. Well, we just got a few minutes left, and I'd like to, take that time to, thank everybody. Thank you, John. Thank Walt. Thank everybody that's helped, bring this to fruition. And it's just the beginning. I mean, we're really just now learning that not just, plant medicine, but these other programs of rehabilitation dealing with life post, using substances, such as, the trauma that is, the vets. I just got to go back to the vets, because right now we're having, I don't know if you were military, John, or if you've got it in your family, but it's a problem, right? People are asked to go into battle to protect a way of life, whether you believe the politics about why people go to war or not. What I know is young men and women are going, and they're being asked to do things that are against what I believe a human being. Taking another life is not in our values. We're not trained to do this. Is not part of who we are. Once you perpetrate that, and you've created a separation in your being from your authentic self, and then there's this other part of you that did this act, and coming back home to a community, a loving community, and we've had this deviation, and we've had this. So it would be like, I don't know, in your faith, John, admission, or what do they do? Do you guys do?
I served a mission for 2 years, in Argentina.
No, like when we sin or we do something that we're not supposed to do, then we go to a confession. I don't know. Is that part of the program, or how do we deal with that when we?
Well, the way that
we make good.
The way that a person in the LDS faith would be to start to repent. If he's offended somebody, you got to go and ask forgiveness. You sit down and talk with your bishop if it's something that's been offensive to a bunch. If it's something between you and your Father in heaven, you take it up with him and say, you know what, I'm going to change my ways. I'm not going to live like this. I'm going to be better. And you repent. You change. That's what repentance is. Just change.
But we address it, right? We make a list, we do an inventory, and we say, these are the things that in my life that I've done. And if there's somebody that I need to go, Native Americans use the term ahomataquiasin, and that means all my relations. And they believe that everything was a relationship, and they sought to live life honoring equanimity, like everything's reciprocal. And it's like, you don't take more than you give. The same thing with gardening or your relationship with your horse. And we can see, we're going towards organic gardening because we see that we have been sort of cheating a little bit using pesticides and these things that close the cycle. They kill things, but they produce food really fast. Or we're doing only 3 primary nutrients in our fertilizers. And there's all these things that don't honor all. It just wants to feed us. And even that doesn't really give us what we need, right? So moving towards honoring the true scope of how our actions affect everybody, taking an inventory, then going and cleaning up the wreckage of our past. I mean, this is outlined in the 12 steps. Most faiths have you doing it so that you can get up in the morning and feel, what, I'm clean, and then stop perpetrating, because you'd have to go clean it up anyway. The medicine starts the process of clearing out the lies that allowed us to perpetrate it, to say, wow, I'm responsible. Now I get to go and figure out, make my amends where possible, where it doesn't cause more damage than good. And then, living in line with my values and not compromising will keep me from having to go back into use. It's outlined in your faith and many others as well,
That's what it's all about, and that's what we certainly hope happens.
Yeah. So the vets are important. There's a nonprofit. I'm working with some people that are going to be joining up. It's called Operation Peace. It's based, I believe, if it's out of Arizona, I'll have more information about them and how we're going to be working collectively. The Recovery Dogs is going to be starting a program. We're going to get a ranch property, and we're going to be inviting not just vets. We'll focus on them because there's a real demand and need immediately to get them in therapy, working with the dogs and the animal, inviting them to do plant medicine, and starting the program of recovery. So the Lovejoy Foundation is another one. And then also Pawsport, which is where the dogs that we're bringing in right now, they've been getting placed through that. They're changing the name to Ozzy's Friends. I'll be listing on our website a list of all these nonprofits. They could always use your support. If you're looking to either foster care, donate money or time, there'll be ways to do that. I don't know about your, again, many religions, or value-based communities want to give a certain amount of time or energy to us to be of service. So if you find yourself driven to do that, I'll give you plenty of opportunities on globalrecoverytoday.com where I'll be listing, all kinds of nonprofits that could use support. And you get to pick your poison. What is it? Who is it that you'd like to support and follow? And there'll be, regular groups where people with values can get together and on a weekly basis talk about how they're doing personally and how, their community is, evolving. And that'll be on Global Recovery Today, where you could be a member of a regular group that checks in and basically talks about what's going on with them and get support from their community. So that's it. Walt.
I'm going to say, John, do you have any final words do you want to close out the show with?
That's for you, John. He's asking.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Walt. In just summation, I would just say, for me, this has been a tremendous experience of growth and of understanding and education. As a man, I was that guy, like I said, a year ago, and I have come to learn and understand in a much greater and a much deeper way things that I didn't understand before. And I would recommend and suggest to anybody listening, take the time to educate yourself. Don't look at things on their face and expect to get an understanding. Take the time to Google, research it, look into it, talk to people who've had the experience, and you'll find that, as I have, that there is a way, there is an opportunity to help, to be of assistance. And I can only hope and pray, and Tyson and I, we've talked about this, that I can be of some assistance going forward in any way, shape I can, as a voice, as a contributor, as a participant. I know that my son has come through this thing and saying, this is my life's work. I want to be of assistance. I want to help people. I want to help them see what I saw, to feel what I feel, to know what I know, to be where I am, and to be able to say, I've got a chance. I can do this. I've got a base to start with, where it wasn't available before and now is. I hope that that any one of us and all of us can come to a point where we understand, there are options. There really are. It isn't dark. It isn't bleak. You don't have to wet your pillow with tears at night, knowing that you've got a son who's never going to be better. That isn't the case.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think you were very blessed, John, the fact that your son found the Albogain Institute so quickly, because other families and folks have gone through rehab after rehab, and in desperation, they look for other options. So you're one of the lucky ones that got the ability to get to point A, and then as a result of that, end up at point B rather easily and rapidly. Yeah. So God bless you for that.
We hope that it'll extend itself well beyond my my scope and reach.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being a part of our show. We really appreciate it. And I know, Tyson, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
So, my phone number, 310-467-6783. Global Recovery Today will be active soon enough. But, pick up the phone, email me at Tyson@Global Recovery Today. And stay tuned with, as, the recovery dogs starts to, offer. I don't know how it's going to evolve and how it's going to launch out, but,
And you can also find us on YouTube, and if you want to make a comment on YouTube, we watch those and we respond to all the comments. We really appreciate the comments, likes, shares, and subscribing on YouTube. And, of course, again, you can find Global Recovery Today here at Universal Broadcasting Network, UBN Radio. We are live every other Wednesday at 7:30 Pacific. And then, of course, we're on Stitcher, iTunes, and now we're proudly part of the iHeart Radio family. So you can find us all there if you want to catch our podcasts. We are out of time.
Right on.
So thanks, guys. Appreciate it, John. Really appreciate you being part of the show. God bless all you and your boys. And I know we'll be hear more from you down the road. Until then, I'm Walt Lusk, your host, with Tyson Elliott of Global Recovery Today. Take care, and God bless.
God bless. Peace and blessings. Thanks, guys.